For the first time in a long time, France is facing a political and economic crisis. It is grappling with high public debt, soaring energy prices, and rising interest rates. While the general idea is that the economic crisis is a result of internal factors, we can't help but draw a correlation between France's current economic crisis and a reduction in its influence in Africa. As you know, France's strong influence in Africa has drastically dropped in recent times. This is a result of the coups that occurred in the continent, especially in the Sahel region. Its military and economic interests in these nations have been cut short. And the reason for all this is thanks to the determination and courage of President Traore and his allies to end France's dominance in their countries. But how has this affected France? Let's find out. As we said, France is in an economic crisis. According to Ramayade, senior director of the Atlantic Council's Africa Center, public debt in France has increased by more than half in 7 years, from $2 trillion to $3.2 trillion. Not to mention, France has 9 million people living in poverty, an increase in factory closures, and a foreign trade deficit of around $100 billion in 2023, a sign of an accelerated deindustrialization of the French economy. Denis Ferrand, head of Paris-based economic research institute Rexicode, confirmed a similar notion, stating that the French economy has weakened over the past few years. According to him, French and European companies have become less competitive with Chinese ones, as production costs have risen by 25% since 2019. But he added that it was a result of years of high inflation, rising interest rates, and soaring energy prices, especially after Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. However, isn't it interesting that this economic crisis is happening at the same time when France's influence has drastically reduced in Africa? If you recall, President François Mitterrand in 1957 predicted that, without Africa, France would not have any position in the 21st century. He was quite categorical that France could only have any position in the 21st century if it maintained its control over African former colonies. Similarly, in 2008, President Jacques Chirac re-echoed the prophecy that, without Africa, France will be relegated to the rank of a third power. According to Xavier Renaud, a French scholar, Africa is critically important to France for several reasons, including maintaining an international status, independent of US and Chinese influences, securing a permanent access to strategic resources, and benefiting from a monopolistic situation. And to attain these objectives and maintain its power over its former colonies, France has to pursue a global policy that is economic, political, and cultural. This is the reason why every successive administration in France has continued the colonial legacy. Even Emmanuel Macron, who said that France would no longer pursue a colonial policy in Africa, has also continued in the colonial path. The only difference is that that legacy passed down from each French administration has been destroyed in his hands. Emmanuel Macron has bungled everything so much so that not only is he despised in Africa, but he is also despised in France. While Africa despises him because he represents France and is a continuation of France's colonial legacy, Macron is despised by France elites because he supposedly destroyed the colonial legacy given to him by his predecessors. It was in his time that Africa woke up from its deep slumber and began to change the order of things. Anti-French sentiments also began to spread across the continent. Francophone Africa began to cut ties with France, choosing Russia and China as partners instead, and France lost its military influence in the Sahel. Before we proceed, here is a reminder to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to our channel if you have not done so already. Now, it can rightly be said that the Burkinabe president, Ibrahim Traore, is the face of a movement that has cut off France's influence in the Sahel. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso, under the leadership of Ibrahim Traore, ended a defense agreement that has been in force since 1960 and kicked out French forces. Mali did the same, ending the 10-year Operation Barkhane, led by France to fight insurgency and insecurity in the country. Niger followed last year after the coup in July, dealing a significant blow to France's policy in Africa. In August last year, a group of 94 French senators wrote an open letter to President Macron in which they criticized his administration over its Africa policy, which has triggered anti-French sentiment in the continent. The letter, published by the French daily Le Figaro, called on Macron to review France's policy in Africa. The senators also noted that the failure of Operation Barkhane was in great part the reason why France and its economic, political, and military presence are now rejected in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and the Central African Republic. Today, the Francafrique of yesterday has been replaced by the military Russafrique, the economic China-Freak, or the diplomatic America-Freak, said the letter. Isn't it time to review our vision of Africa and its link with France? The letter asked. Despite their letter to the president, the situation did not change. Anti-French sentiments continued to increase, and African countries continued to prefer to work with Russia, China, and the non-European countries. And, with the way things have evolved, it doesn't seem like France would ever get back the influence it had in Africa, because more African countries, including those that had strong ties with France, such as Senegal and Chad, have joined the trend of changing their policies towards France. As we said, Traore is the face of the movement. Perhaps that is why he has experienced more than 10 assassination attempts, which we are sure that France was behind. Honestly, it's not a strange thing to say because history has shown us countless examples of African leaders who have been assassinated by France for going against France's interests. One such leader was the iconic president of Burkina Faso, Thomas Sankara, who was killed by his friend with the backing of France. Traore has taken on the mantle of Sankara's leadership, so it's not really a surprise that he has experienced several assassination attempts. The only good news is that he has survived them all. Think about this. Since Traore came to power in Burkina Faso in September 2022, there have been more than 10 assassination attempts against him. This makes him the only African head of state to have survived the most assassination attempts in a short period of time. The first attack came just 2 months after former military leader Paul-Henri Damiba took power. Interestingly, the most recent 10th attack was orchestrated by the same man, Paul-Henri Damiba. When the first attack happened, Traore revealed that he knew the perpetrators, but decided to let them go free with impunity and negotiate with them. He also revealed that funds were distributed to convince certain people to remove him from power, but urged people not to be fooled. His approach must have worked, as no further attacks took place until September 2023. Now, it's not clear exactly what caused the attack, but it was the second time that Traore had survived an assassination attempt. This time, however, Traore did not release the perpetrators, and instead launched an investigation into the attack, finding that 3 military personnel were involved in the plot. They were then arrested and charged with participating in a military conspiracy, violation of military orders, conspiracy against national security, criminal organization, and dangerous acts. Since that second attack, Traore has had no peace. He has had one attack after another. The third attempt came later that month, in September, and between then and September this year, Traore has experienced 8 assassination attempts. The most recent attempt can be regarded as the worst because it contained a wicked plot. While all previous attacks were aimed solely at President Traore, this 10th one left hundreds of civilians and military personnel dead. According to reports, this sinister plot was orchestrated by some Burkinabe nationals living in neighboring countries such as Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Nigeria. Burkinabe's Minister of Security stated in this case that those involved in planning the plot included some Burkinabe civilians, military and ex-military personnel, all of whom were supported by Western intelligence agencies. Burkinabe civil society and economic actors were also involved in the plot. Thankfully, the attack was stopped by the Burkinabe military. Now, if we take a critical look at all the attacks against Traore, we will see that they all have something in common. The masterminds of the attacks are all local actors, which means that they are all from Burkina Faso. But does this mean that there are people who do not want Traore to remain president of Burkina Faso, despite the support of the people? Well, when it comes to African politics and governance, one thing must be understood. External factors are always at play. Africa is rich in resources, and history has shown us that Western countries such as the United States and France want easy access to these resources. But the only way the West can get easy access to these resources is through government control, not through trade like China. If the government of an African country is pro-Western, the West can sign an agreement to easily access the country's resources in exchange for peanuts. This is their ultimate goal, and the summits between African countries and Western countries that always talk about how they want to develop the continent are just a farce. So the plan is to get the government's cooperation to give them easy access to the resources, and history shows that this plan usually works. Previously, most African leaders were pro-Western and strong allies of the West. This stance has fostered corruption, poverty, and underdevelopment for decades because African leaders look the other way and allow the West to have unlimited access to their country's resources. In return, African leaders can plunder as much money as they want and rule as long as they want without being criticized by the international community. All the Western countries have to do to continue claiming to be the defenders of democracy is to hold farcical elections. We have seen this happen many times before our eyes. However, the entrance of President Traore and the other leaders of the Sahel completely changed everything. They believe in prioritizing the independence and prosperity of their country, and as a result, they decided to go anti-France. This changed the game for France, as France's formerly strong influence in Francophone Africa has significantly dropped. Now, while some political elites may not say it, the truth is that France's current standing in Africa is a huge problem. In mid-December 2023, the former economic minister of France, Thierry Breton, said something very striking. He said, "It's the imbecility of Emmanuel Macron that opened the eyes of Africans. One thing is sure, if France loses its colonies, our children and grandchildren will go to Africa to search for their livelihoods. Immigration will change direction. Macron needs to go. If not, France will suffer. Europe needs to unite to fight this new African vision. If one of the heads of the putschists falls, the others will abandon the vision. Africa does not have history, so Africa can't manage the world." First of all, if France's influence and easy access to African resources weren't going to affect France, why would the former economic minister make such a statement? Don't forget that he was once in charge of France's economy, so surely he should know what he is saying, right? One thing we are sure of is the fact that France's economy will certainly be affected because France no longer has access to the cheap resources it formerly had access to. Take uranium, for example. Since independence, France got a significant part of uranium from Niger through its uranium company Orano. With this access, France was able to fuel its electricity and military needs. However, the military leader of Niger has completely cut off Orano from having access to its uranium mines. This means that France no longer has access to cheap energy source. There is no doubt that this will surely have an effect on its economy. Now, let's analyze Thierry's statement. First, he said that it was the imbecility of President Macron that opened the eyes of Africans. But is it true? First, the change in African geopolitics, which began with the coup in the Sahel, has become so obvious that even French elites like Thierry are aware of it. That is why he said that Africans' eyes have been opened. However, what he meant by this was that Africa has been asleep for a long time, which is why France has been able to maintain its power over the continent since the colonial period. It also means that France has deliberately taken steps to keep the continent asleep by installing puppet leaders, sending aid, and making Africa continually dependent on France for everything, including trade and defense. However, if he were to say that Macron's actions have opened Africans' eyes, we would not agree. Rather, it was the insecurity and underdevelopment that Africans have suffered for so long, and the coup that brought about the change of government that opened Africans' eyes and woke them up from their slumber. Thierry then said that if France lost its colonies, the next generation of French citizens would head to Africa in search of a livelihood, and migration would take a different direction. So, instead of Africans taking dangerous routes to Europe in search of better opportunities, French citizens would come to Africa. But for what? Do you think what he meant was that French citizens would be forced to come to the shores of Africa and beg to be settled in order to find better opportunities? No, that's not what he meant. What Thierry actually means is that the next generation of French citizens will be forced to launch a second wave of violent colonial occupation of Africa, with free access to all of Africa's resources, both human and mineral. Shocking, right? But it shouldn't be. You see, France has always seen Africa as its backyard, full of all kinds of treasures that can be accessed at any time. Just because colonialism ended decades ago doesn't mean that it won't start again in our time. Interestingly, Thierry is not the only one who has spoken openly about the recolonization of Africa. Many French and U.S. elites, such as former French Army Chief of Staff General Lecointre, have recently advocated the reconquest of the African continent. The reason they can say it so confidently, without fear of backlash from so-called human rights activists, is because they believe that if it actually happens, no one, not even the United Nations, can do anything about it. And in the end, they also believe that Africans can't do anything about it. The African continent is just a continent with a lot of third world countries and unpatriotic leaders. That's why, Thierry added, Europe, not just France, must fight what he calls this new vision of Africa. And the way to get there is to overthrow one of the military regimes, possibly by assassination. In his own words, if one of the coup leaders falls from power, the others will abandon their vision. First of all, France is aware that this wave of coups cannot be compared to previous ones, where the military seized power for the love of the people. It is known that these coups are the beginning of revolutions. But it is very sad that there are still people, even among African leaders, who consider these coups to be nothing more than an attack on democracy. And they are aware of this fact, which is why the best thing for Europe to do is to overthrow the military regime. As Thierry said, if one falls, the others will abandon their vision. No wonder that Ibrahim Traore, the face of the African Revolution, faced some 9 attempted coups in the 2 years he was in power. Thierry's statement simply confirmed the tactics that France has used and will continue to use to crush African revolutions. He concluded, Africa has no history. Therefore, Africa cannot manage the world. This statement is as wrong as possible, but it only proves how France and the Western world see Africa. For them, Africans can't do anything. Africa is uncivilized and people are no different from animals. So it is up to them to educate Africans and help them manage their resources. What a stupid statement. Africa has a rich history and culture that the Europeans tried to demoralize and trample during colonial times. The truth is that this statement makes us angry, but even more so, the puppets of unpatriotic leaders who have adorned the African continent since independence. If Africa only had good leaders and those good leaders were not murdered, France and the Western countries would not have the courage to make such a statement. All Africa needs now are strong patriotic leaders who are willing to defend the interests of their people. Africa has everything it takes to become the greatest continent on earth. It doesn't need France or the West. It just needs good leadership. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to like this video, drop a comment, and share.